In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat.
I think I can smell shite. Yes, I can definitely smell shite.
J.D. Vance, the Vice Prince of MAGA land there. He was over in Germany for the annual Munich Security Conference. The war in Ukraine was on everybody's mind, except for J.D.'s. As over this side of the pond, we're used to far-right actors hiding behind the free speech argument to spread disinformation and hatred. Unfortunately for us, except from a small group of Millwall fans and some guys over in Northern Ireland, we tend to see it for what it is. The right stoking up fear of immigrants so that we don't start looking at why the gap between the rich and the poor and the gap between the rich and our governments is the real corrosive force within our societies across the Western world. As providing public services becomes increasingly difficult for broke governments. And a lack of housing and job prospects for young people means that we're unlikely to experience the quality of life enjoyed by our parents and grandparents. Far-right parties like MAGA or the AfD encourage the people to punch down and blame the most vulnerable people in our societies, when in reality the problem comes from greedy big business and hugely wealthy oligarchs. We should be punching up. Ironically, Vance gave us an example of this kind of disinformation in action in the very same speech when talking about a new law restricting protests outside of Scottish abortion clinics.
This last October, just a few months ago, the Scottish government began distributing letters to citizens whose houses lay within so-called safe access zones, warning them that even private prayer within their own homes may amount to breaking the law. Naturally, the government urged readers to report any fellow citizen suspected guilty of thought crime.
Yes, I can definitely smell shite.
Look, this never happened. A total fabrication. But it is a good example of the risks involved when politicians use the free speech absolutist argument as a license to say whatever they want to get your vote, or when in power to distract the public from their actions behind the scenes. In Germany, the far-right AfD is just like MAGA, and it too is quick to spread misinformation and disinformation in their maniacal quest for power. They've been caught spreading fake crime statistics, claiming that crime rates in Germany have skyrocketed due to immigration. However, official data from the German Federal Criminal Police, the BKA, shows that overall crime has actually declined in recent years, including crimes committed by immigrants. And they've also spread fake stories about crimes allegedly committed by refugees, such as fabricated rape cases that never occurred. These are often amplified on social media. They've also been caught spreading lies about election fraud, are climate change deniers, spread Kremlin disinformation and anti-vax conspiracy theories. They're basically the German MAGA. In Germany, we have all seen how that story turned out for America. Don't be fooled again. In the UK, the Welsh Senate have a brilliant new solution to stop lying politicians. The Standards of Conduct Committee, in their devolved government in Cardiff, are looking to remove politicians from their seat if they've been proved to have lied. But here's some free speech for you, Vance. You're the Tina Turner of turncoat traitors, considering your administration will cut federally funded Title I for education in deprived areas, and probably a load of other federal programmes you benefited from when you were a kid. Plus there's your switch from anti-Trump to MAGA. And without your beard, you look like two 7-year-olds in a trench coat. And as Jesus said, the meek shall inherit the earth and love thy neighbour. He's unlikely to be a fan of anything you guys have done in office so far. This actually brings me to my favourite part of Trump's inauguration. 4 weeks ago. Yeah, it's only been 4 weeks. And he was taught a lesson on what real Christianity is all about by Bishop Marion Buddy.
Let me make one final plea, Mr. President. Millions have put their trust in you. And as you told the nation yesterday, you have felt the providential hand of a loving God. In the name of our God, I ask you to have mercy upon the people in our country who are scared now. There are gay, lesbian, and transgender children in Democratic, Republican, and independent families, some who fear for their lives. And the people who pick our crops and clean our office buildings, who labor in poultry farms and meat packing plants, who wash the dishes after we eat in restaurants and work the night shifts in hospitals, they may not be citizens or have the proper documentation, but the vast majority of immigrants are not criminals. They pay taxes and are good neighbors. They are faithful members of our churches and mosques, synagogues, wadara, and temples. I ask you to have mercy, Mr. President, on those in our communities whose children fear that their parents will be taken away, and that you help those who are fleeing war zones and persecution in their own lands to find compassion and welcome here. Our God teaches us that we are to be merciful to the stranger, for we were all once strangers in this land. May God grant us the strength and courage to honor the dignity of every human being, to speak the truth to one another in love, and walk humbly with each other and our God for the good of all people in this nation and the world.
Man, did you see their faces? That's what you call a tough crowd. Who wouldn't be moved by that speech? Trump tried to style it out with that Droopy the dog dipped in orange paint look that he does. But his Veep JD needs to work on his poker face, man. In fact, you can frame for frame spot the moment his faith evaporated and he was like, well, I guess I'm a Satanist now. Melania, on the other hand, looked like she was enjoying it.
To find compassion and welcome here.
After kicking off her second stint as the First Lady at the inauguration dressed like Walter White after he'd gone full Heisenberg. Last time she was First Lady, she said she wanted to help protect women. But given the Handmaid's Tale vibe of the whole Trump 2 administration, aiming to take women's rights back 70 years, that's out of the window. And cooking the best meth in the market must be our fallback. The money they're going to make from the crypto scam would be enough for most people. But the Trumps are always on the hustle, and now the Mexican border is closed, filling the vacuum with blue meth will no doubt be a highly profitable venture. Trump also signed a load of executive orders, the big one being his declaration that there are only two genders from the point of conception. However, he clearly failed Biology 101 given every fetus is technically female for the first 4 weeks of pregnancy, inadvertently reclassifying every man in the US as a woman, legally making every man in the US trans, and making Trump the first trans president, finishing the job Jesse Waters started last summer.
Be a man and then vote for a woman just because she's a woman is either childish, that person has mommy issues, or they're just trying to be accepted by other women. And I heard the scientists say the other day that when a man votes for a woman, he actually transitions into a woman.
Your history-making first trans President Trump is back raising eyebrows over his close relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin. After he accused Ukraine of starting the war, he must have been on the golf course, as we all literally saw the Russian tanks roll into Ukraine back in 2022. Which calls into question those P-tapes again. They must really have been scandalous. You didn't drink it, did you? Also, for a master of deal-making, saying Ukraine should concede territory and not join NATO before the talks had even began was rookie behaviour. And you're now saying that Putin holds all the cards. You don't remember whose side you're meant to be on. The US President is not meant to answer to some tin pot dictator in Moscow, who's using North Korean troops as well. Why don't you use some of those Doge savings and prepare a big fat military aid package for Ukraine to kick some Moscow fascist ass this year? Putin's on the offensive again in Kursk after your conversation. Prepare a roadmap for NATO membership and demand Putin pulls right back to the 2014 borders, or you'll give Ukraine back their nuclear deterrent. Call out Putin for his war crimes and demand he and all others face justice in a Nuremberg trial-style setup. And demand Putin writes a cheque to pay full reparations on the estimated $500 billion in economic, social and infrastructural damages since the start of his illegal invasion. Instead, Trump's trying to blackmail Ukraine into signing over half of its total natural resource reserves. To put this into context, The US is reported to have sent $175 billion in military aid and non-military aid to Ukraine. However, firstly, a large chunk of that has actually gone to the US military-industrial complex to manufacture military hardware to replace the arms sent to Ukraine. Furthermore, the US is far from the only supporter of Ukraine. The EU and its members have collectively provided close to $145 billion in financial, military and humanitarian aid. In addition to the existing aid, European leaders are currently working on a new military assistance package worth at least $20 billion to further bolster Ukraine's defence capabilities. Furthermore, the European Union has pledged €35 billion in financial support to Ukraine for this year. However, as Putin's illegal war started under the Biden administration, the MAGA-controlled GOP have been willfully spreading disinformation and misinformation about the US spend as it was seen as a vote winner. The real scandalous element of Trump's immoral, opportunistic, neo-imperialist desire to annex 50% of Ukraine's sovereign wealth is the actual value of Ukraine's resources. For $175 billion in aid, Trump wants to take half of Ukraine's natural resources, with estimates of their total value varying between 15 and 26 trillion. This is the equivalent of a shady loan shark charging 1,000% interest rates, effectively turning Ukraine into a US colony, when their people have spent 3 years fighting and dying to prevent Putin from turning them into a Russian vassal state. And given Trump's already been impeached for trying to blackmail Zelensky when he was last in office, if he carries on down this path, a third impeachment after the 2026 midterms looks a guarantee. As Europe faces the new reality of an isolationist America, standing insanely alone against the multilateral institutions like NATO, the EU and the UN that have helped keep Europe free from the horrors of war for generations, the US is now Europe's main economic adversary. A situation that makes the AfD's Alice Weidl's anti-EU stance look totally out of touch with reality. Add this to the disastrous effects of Brexit on the UK, both economically and reputationally. The evidence is clear that Europe is better together, and I wouldn't be surprised if the UK reversed Brexit and rejoined the EU in the coming years. On top of this, you've then got the militaristic dictator Putin, who Europe may now have to prepare to face alone without US military support, as Washington shifts its mighty resources to facing China. Again, the AfD's policy towards Russia is entirely out of touch with reality. Who, like Trump, would have you believe Putin's illegal invasion was somehow Ukraine's fault? In reality, how many of Germany's current issues are really down to Russia? Putin deliberately bombed civilian areas in Syria in order to launch a wave of refugees into the EU, and many ended up in Germany. He also used his country's cheap gas to try to blackmail Europe as he secretly plotted to rebuild the Russian Empire and has been conducting a secret hybrid war on Germany, the EU, the UK and the US for over a decade. In 2016, a fake news story spread by Russian state media and pro-Kremlin activists, known as the Lisa case, a Russian misinformation campaign claiming that a 13-year-old Russian-German girl named Lisa was kidnapped and raped by migrants in Berlin. The story was completely false, but it triggered protests by the Russian-German community, fueled by Russian media like RT, formerly known as Russia Today, and Sputnik. Even Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov pushed the story, showing how the Kremlin exploits fake narratives to inflame tensions and discredit Germany's migration policies. They also hacked the Bundestag in 2015, stealing thousands of confidential emails, some of which later resurfaced on Russian propaganda sites. Russian state media provides favourable coverage for AfD politicians and spreads their anti-NATO, anti-migration rhetoric. Some reports suggest Russian oligarchs may have secretly funded AfD campaigns. AfD's allies Front National, Nigel Farage in England, and Trump, and many other far-right groups across Europe all have links to Russian money. And this is not because Putin's ideologically aligned. At home, Putin is very pro-multiculturalism, as Russia is made up of a wide range of non-Russian ethnic republics, including many Muslim people. But a fractured EU, or even one that ceases to exist, and the US walking away from NATO, is what Putin needs to realise his dream of creating a new Russian empire. Weidl and the AfD are one of his wide network of useful idiots, inadvertently working to help him realise his twisted dream. That in reality means more wars like the one in Ukraine, and more innocent bloodshed. People need to look at what these populist movements like the AfD or MAGA really stand for. Look at Trump as an example. He appeals to ordinary people, until in power. In 2016 he said he'd bring back coal. Then after defeating Hillary Clinton, he screwed the miners, did nothing with coal, and instead gave Americans' richest 1% $1 trillion tax cut. In America, the UK and other advanced economies like Germany, the real issue is the rich and big business do not pay their fair share. That's why public services are failing, and why young people can't afford a house. The answer there is on the left of politics, not the far right. Populists like Trump are quick to abandon promises when money is dangled in front of them. I already know Idle has Swiss bank accounts ready to use if she ever gains power. And when the AfD ultimately fail to fix Germany's core issues, ordinary Germans will be stuck with a mess as Vidal runs back over the border to Switzerland. I forgot to mention, when over in Munich, Vance tried to throw an after party in his hotel room. But this undercover footage shows the Irish delegation stuck their head in the door, but were not up for staying.
Two monkey hookers and a racist dwarf. I think I'm heading home.
Right, I'm away up the road. Before I go, tennis. Would there have been any comment if Andy Murray had done the gay Gordon with his missus after winning the Wimbledon? Or if Tim Hedman had bust out Morris dancing? Although the Scotsman actually won it. An Englishman has not won it since 1936. But Serena crip-walking was an unacceptable form of culture. Get the ski and do.
Keep it gangsta, dog. Keep it gangsta. Keep it gangsta, dog. Keep it gangsta.